Okay, so first of all, I want you to introduce yourself and tell us what would make you a good candidate for Colne Valley.
Well, hello, I'm Thelma Walker and I'm Labour candidate for Colne Valley Constituency. I've lived here in the Colne Valley for 27 years and I've known it for over 30 years, and I love the people and I love the place. My life is politics. My husband is a local Labour councillor and I'm very active in the community. I know the local people, I know the issues that are facing them, and I think I'm a brave person. I think to go into politics these days you need to be brave enough to speak out for those who can't speak up for themselves.
You mentioned issues. What do you feel are the big issues nationally?
Nationally, Brexit, obviously at the moment, but I think the question of Brexit is poisoning politics at the moment. I think the political discussion is being sidetracked all about what kind of Brexit we have, and we're not having the conversation in politics about what the key issues are for families that are struggling, and for people in society, the cuts to our health and education. And I think that, the question is, do we have a sensible Brexit or do we have a hard Brexit? And I think that's distracting us from the key issues in politics that are facing people at the moment in our country.
To change the subject, there's been a lot made of Jeremy Corbyn's unelectability. Do you back him or not? And if you do, why do you stand by your leader?
I would always stand by my leader. He was elected twice democratically by the party, and it's not who or what Jeremy Corbyn is or isn't, it's about what he stands for. It's about, fairness and justice and for the many and not for the few, and that's what I support.
You've mentioned a couple of the main things nationally, but what are the local issues that are going to count in this election?
Definitely cuts to health and social care. I've been a big supporter, and I'm a big supporter of the Hands Off HRI and the Slathway SOS campaigns. All are about cuts and the dismantling of our National Health Service, and it's the social care. It's those joined up services that we've taken for granted for so many years that are now bit by bit being eroded. And I care about the staff in those hospitals as well as the patients, and locally I'm hearing people say, I can't get a doctor's appointment, or I've been waiting 4 hours in accident and emergency. We're now being threatened with the closure of our A&E, and the Hands Off HRI group and campaign group are working so hard. I've been on rallies with them down to London and here in Huddersfield, and they're a great group of people, but it's not just about our A&E, it's about all of our service, our National Health Service.
As a Labour person, it's likely to not, but there is a lot of disgruntlement locally with the Labour Council. Why should locals believe the National Labour Party will leave them any better off than they feel they are with the Labour group here?
Well, I think one thing that the Conservatives have done well is to make sure that local Labour councils are to blame for the cuts that they've inflicted on Kirklees in particular, that suffered £194 million worth of cuts over the last few years, and currently are having to save £1 million a week in savings. Now, any compassionate Labour group will always prioritise the most vulnerable, the youngest and the eldest, and their social care and their education and public health, and that's what the Labour group are doing. And of course this government wants scapegoats, and they're using our Labour Council as the scapegoat. And I will speak up on behalf of our local councillors, because I went as part of a delegation when a motion was put forward by a joint Labour, Liberal, Green and Independent council group to speak out against the cuts to our NHS. And at that meeting in January, every single one of the Tory councillors voted against the motion. It didn't get publicity at the time, but I felt very strongly and spoke up personally in support of that motion. So it was just the Tory councillors, all of them, even ones who've been involved in the campaign with HRI, who actually voted against that motion. So you can see that it's not strong and stable, it's cynical and selfish.
Speaking about Huddersfield Royal Infirmary, what's your vision for the future of the NHS UK-wide?
I think when the NHS was founded, it was about cradle to grave, that people would feel safe and looked after and cared for. And my vision for the NHS is not just about hospitals. It's about GP surgeries, it's about going out there and making sure that old people, if they want to stay in their home, are looked after in their home. And my vision is that we return to that. We return to a place, a country, where people from birth, from cradle to grave, feel that they will be looked after. They don't have to sell their home off if they need to be looked after in their old age. If their child is ill, they won't have to travel miles and miles to go and get the child looked after. That we should, as a society, look after each other, but the state should make sure that every individual is cared for and looked after. That's my vision.
Back to local and education, how do you feel the education system can be improved locally?
Well, locally there's some excellent schools, and I'm sitting in one now in the playground, and both my children went to this school. So a lot of the local schools, obviously education is very dear to my heart as an ex-teacher and head teacher. What's happening at the moment is that we have good schools, as I say, but they're under pressure all the time for targets and tests and to meet those targets. And there's a narrowing of the curriculum. So it's what I would call a joyless curriculum. The arts and IT, creative arts subjects are being squeezed out, and the latest round of cuts, which just in this Colne Valley ward will amount to over £1.5 million, are going to hit things like the curriculum and what we can offer to children, because I've always believed as a teacher and head teacher it's about the whole child. It's about their mental health, their physical health and their intellectual health. And what's happening at the moment is that we've got children who are, in my opinion, working to targets and tests. And I think the threat of academisation, now today Labour have released this idea of a national education service, which, for me it's music to my ears. Last week there was talk of children's health being a priority, childhood obesity, dental care, mental health, and under fives. All of those things are really important, so thinking about early help to make sure that children are healthy and can learn effectively.
It's a well-known fact that it's ever more competitive for children, and they are forced to compete in some way with their education to get the sort of job that they want. Do you think we could have improvement in the transition from education to employment with a view to making it easier for them to understand what they're going to do and how they're going to do it?
Yeah, I think it links to what I was saying about cuts to the curriculum and what schools can offer, because we need to prepare children and young people for the 21st century world of work, and we need to give them that choice. If you limit the curriculum, you're limiting their choice of employment, and I think it's really important that we have a rich and creative curriculum so that we've got young people going into IT, we've got people going into performing arts, we've got people going into medicine, we've got the builders we need, we've got the plumbers we need, so it's giving them that choice. And I also think that Labour's policy about returning educational maintenance allowance will help and support families so that they continue with their training and education.
I'd like to move on to children now, and from that it's pretty certain that child poverty is on the increase. I think that's fair to say. So what would you do in the way of tackling the increasing child poverty there is?
Well, again,
slow it down, let alone stop
yes,
it.
Well, that's right. Well, obviously, another thing very close to my heart, I was head teacher of one of the first Sure Start children's centres, and 350 have been closed since this government came into power. What Sure Start were doing was that early help and that early intervention to make sure that families that were struggling, were given that support and guidance. I have seen children come into school in the middle of winter without the gloves, without the coat. I've seen children come into school starving hungry. I know what it's like firsthand, and I know children who didn't want to leave school where it was warm and welcoming because they knew they were going home to a cold house without heating and without food in the cupboard. I know the impact of poverty, and the Trussell Trust has found that over the last year alone, 17%, there's been a 17% increase in use of food banks. You know, and we are called Food Bank Britain now, you know, and that is shameful in today's society. So I would want to see that we've got support for young families, that the job that Sure Start was doing in that early help, you know, is built upon and continued, and public health as well, you know, kind of looking after children's physical and mental health. We need to invest in our future, and that's investing in our children.
Mm-hmm. Let's move to the other end of the age scale now. Pensioners, elderly welfare, end of life care, it's suffering too.
Yes, it is. I'm part of the Women Against State Pension Inequality campaign, and you know, women born in the 50s who expected to collect their state pension at 60 no longer can, and some not until they're nearly 70. Now that's all right if you have a work pension, but actually if you're reliant on that, then some women are absolutely destitute at the moment. For young people nowadays, you know, lack of incentive to want to work and strive hard if they think that they can't get full-term employment and on 0 hours contracts, and then have to work until they're 68 or 70 before they can get their state pension. End of life care, you know, cradle to grave I mentioned before. You know, we should let people live the last years of their life with respect and dignity. My own mother, who died in HRI a couple of years ago, he was 86 years old, and you know, she had paid her taxes, and you know, she deserved to die. She was looked after wonderfully by the hospital staff, but they were facing the cuts. They couldn't find her a bed in that last few hours of her life. You know, those staff are trying to do their very best, but they're understaffed, underpaid and under stress. Labour will do something about that.
Again, widening the subject, what do you envisage the future of public services like? Libraries, sports, even public transport, which I remember used to be all civically run at one time.
That's right. Well, I'm a trustee as part of an asset transfer of a local public building in the Colne Valley. And yeah, it's great that groups of people are volunteering to take on the responsibility. But you know, we shouldn't be relying on charity. We shouldn't be relying on volunteers. Those buildings belong to our society and our community. And unfortunately, our local council have to make these hard choices I mentioned earlier. If it's an old person being allowed to stay in their own home and being looked after and nursed, if that's the priority, if it's a young family who needs support, then that has to be, the most vulnerable in our society have to be supported. And it does make me rather cross that, you know, the Conservatives who voted for the cuts to local government stand outside our libraries with banners saying "Save our library," when they are the very people who voted for the cuts to local government. And you know, the word hypocrite, I'm afraid, springs to mind. You know, so I feel that yes, we're managing with volunteers supporting, but actually it's about having empowerment for our local councils to be able to keep our public buildings so that it's for the common good.
Thank you very much indeed for your time. But before we go, why should people vote for you on the day?
Well, I hope some of my answers in this interview.
Yeah, we're going to have to do that again.
Yeah.
Do you want me to take it from the question?
If you can do.
No problem.
Yeah.
Just tell me when you want me to go.
And
Thank you very much indeed for being our guest and answering the questions so well. But
Thank you.
one thing before we leave you, why should people vote for you?
Well, I hope some of my answers in this interview will explain that or answer that question. But I have sincerity, I have integrity. I live here. I'm not going to do anything that isn't but the best for Colne Valley. I have bravery. I have campaign experience, I have experience in politics. I know and love this valley and the constituency. And I hope that people will trust me to work for the many, not for the few.